All right. How's everyone doing this afternoon? Good? Wow, I'm loud. Let's do it one more time. How's everyone doing this afternoon? Woo! All right. This is probably, I'm not biased at all, but one of the most exciting sessions. Some people have even suggested that after this session, you will have learned everything you need to learn. So I'm really excited to put this session in context for you. The reason for why I wanted you to interact is because the whole point here is not us just talking at you, is to interact with you. The idea here is, as we think about making Gen AI work, first step, we're going to introduce each person on the stage here so you know who you're dealing with. We're not going to show demos. We're not going to show slides, so don't worry about that. So I'm going to start, I guess, and so you know who I am. I'm Bruno Aziza. I work at CapitalG. So CapitalG is Alphabet's independent investment fund. So I'm involved in companies like Databricks, Dataiku, Colibra, and many of the others you might have heard in the data and AI space. I've been in this space for over 25 years. I know you're probably wondering, how is it possible, 27-year-old? But trust me, I look much younger than what I actually am. And I had the opportunity to work with this guy over here, Sudhir Hasbe, at two companies, one at Microsoft and one at Google. Before that, I was running outbound product management for data analytics at Google. So that's a little bit about me. I think I'm the only person on the panel whose last name reads forward and backwards the same way. So if you need me, either Google my name or you have my email address, first name, last name, @google.com. All right, let's move on next to our most esteemed, and you've got the whole thing.
I am. I'm
Tell us a
representing.
little bit about us, Anjan. About you,
Anjan Kundavaram. I lead product at Fivetran. Fivetran, if you don't know, a data movement company, moving data from like 500 plus sources to a favorite cloud data warehouse in a very simple and reliable way. So my background's been in like data and infrastructure companies, IBM precisely, and so on. I've also done a stint on the application side, so I can kind of give you perspectives on AI from being a vendor and sort of being on the application side. So excited to be here with Amit, Sudhir, and Bruno. So looking forward to the session.
And you were also, if you missed his session on SiliconANGLE this morning, you've got a few customers you're going to talk to us about.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how long have you been at Fivetran?
I am 1 month in, so you'll get my fresh perspective with Fivetran.
So whatever he says about Fivetran messaging right now, don't just use it against him. He's in the process of learning it. All right. Amit, tell us about you.
Yeah, so my name is Amit Prakash. I am one of the co-founders and CTO of ThoughtSpot. In case you don't know, ThoughtSpot is an AI-driven analytics company. So we have the distinction of solving the kinds of problems that people are solving today with Gen AI for over a decade. So we got started in 2012 when we had this interface which looked and felt like Google to be able to ask data questions and get back answers and data visualization. We still do that better than anybody else. Before that, I was leading a machine learning team at Google, which was very interesting because every time we increase the accuracy of the model by a couple of percent, literally Google's revenue went up by a couple of percent. And so we had all the resources in the world to train machine learning models, and we had models that were 2 orders of magnitude larger than anybody else at the time. So I've been doing AI for a long time and really excited to be part of this session. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. Also, you have a tour that's going on, I think, in a few weeks. You've got sessions, and I think Ryan, who's in the audience, probably can tell you more about what's going on. If you want to find out more about ThoughtSpot, they got a whole series that they're doing across the nation, maybe across the world. I know I'm on one of them. All right, and the last person on the panel is my friend Sudhir. Tell us about you.
Hello everyone, good to be here and good to see everyone. I'm Sudhir, I'm Chief Product Officer for Neo4j. Basically, I'm working with large organizations on knowledge graphs, Gen AI, GraphRag, bunch of topics, and I can talk more about it as we go today. Prior to that, I was running data analytics at Google Cloud for almost 5.5 years. So work with Bruno there, but I've also worked with ThoughtSpot and Fivetran in the ecosystem for many years now. And so super excited about today's session. The topic is interesting and hopefully have some good stories from different customers to share here.
And so we all know each other here, so I'm going to be pushing them to give us specifics, but help me push them as well. In the front row here, you have Nicole, she should get all the credit for this. She put the whole session together, and so if you want to find out more about Google Cloud after this, make sure you find Nicole. Let's start with the most, I guess, obvious question all of us have. The session is called Make Gen AI Work. Recent surveys have showed lots amount of organizations trying to deploy. I think 70% of organizations have some Gen AI in production. And there's a lot of issues that people think about around data privacy and governance and so forth. So let's start with you. So how do you think about the barriers to success?
Yeah. That's a really good question, and like something I keep thinking about. A couple of points. The first thing I feel like that sort of gets undernoticed is LLMs are probabilistic. And like if you think in the enterprise, all our tasks that we kind of work on are deterministic. Definition for an ARR, sales conversion pipeline, doing a claims process. They're all like very deterministic. And you need to kind of go do fine tuning on these models so you can kind of downsample. So you kind of make that one answer right. And that's kind of hard to do. So this is sort of why you see demos kind of being very successful and you kind of run into production and then it don't kind of really work. The second barrier, Bruno, is like companies still need to focus on data. Like it's data quality, kind of getting all your data in one place. A lot of the context is in unstructured data, and like how do you actually get that in one place and really think about it? So I think companies are under-investing in that. So you can't really get an outcome if you don't do that. And the third point I'd like to make is sometimes I'm seeing companies go spend a lot of, like RAG is great, but spend a lot of energy on RAG without you kind of getting the basics of data infrastructure. And like the models are going to change. Maybe planning will get better. Maybe context windows are going to get better. So if you kind of go myopically, like I'm going to spend all my energy on RAG without getting a data infrastructure right, I think that might not be wise.
Okay, and I want to start thinking about how do you take each of these concepts of the concept of the demo and then kind of being kind of blown away by that and then focusing on the right concepts. How do you think about the issues? How your issues relates to what he's talking about? Because you're higher on the stack, right?
Yeah, so I think the way I see it is that accuracy is the number one thing. I think security, governance, all these things are there.
Yeah.
But if the products really work, people will break through glass to make them work. And the real reason is that these things are not that good yet. And there are only few products that have figured out how to make it into a reliable enterprise product, and those products are working. Yeah. Everybody else is kind of showing demos, and that's where the rubber when the rubber meets the road, it doesn't work, and that's the biggest problem.
So you're not too worried about security and governance, you're more worried about the accuracy of the information itself.
I think if the products deliver on their promise, everything else will get figured out.
Okay, I'm going to want to drill into how we solve for those things, but before we go there, Sudhir, what do you see with your customers?
I think the first thing is lack of understanding of the core technology pieces and what is good for the specific functions. I think you mentioned this right, which is probabilistic versus deterministic. But the other way of saying this is the transformers technology, the large language models were built on this assumption that they are a generative technology, which means they're going to generate information for you. And the sparser the data, the more chances that it's going to give you an inaccurate answer. That's the fundamental things behind the technology. Now, over a period of time, we will have agents and many more deterministic things around it. But the technology is good for language, but it's not great for giving you deterministic answers or giving you decision points in an organization. So I see a lot of times in conversations, companies will talk about, I built a decision engine based on Gen AI. Great. What happens? How do you know it's going to always be deterministic, giving right answers? So that's one thing. Let me give you an actual example. A few months back, I think you were there too, and we were talking to our friends at I think at Mercado Libre.
Yeah.
And one of our friends runs the whole data infrastructure there, and his challenge was not the governance from the perspective of regular governance. It was, hey, I have now thousands of developers in the company, all excited about Gen AI. They're all trying to build applications. They all want to go ahead and use different models. Some of them have started using OpenAI APIs directly. Some of them are using Vertex AI. there is no control on what data is supposed to be sent out, what can you send, how do you know what data is moving out and all. So it feels like in organizations, larger organizations, there is this chaotic environment. So governance, not just from data governance and access policies, but what can you do with that data for what kind of use cases, that is a challenge. And we were talking to one of our other friends, he said Ford, and he was explaining their infrastructure. And what they have done is they have a centralized single API built by one team. It allows you to get access to any model you want on any platform, but everything is governed centrally, so they can control what's going out. They know they can monitor it more than control. And if some data is going out that shouldn't be going out, they can see it. They can build this kind of telemetry across the organization. So just I think one of the biggest challenges I see is this, everybody wanting to go use different kinds of tooling, but in organizations, large enterprises, lack of infrastructure to monitor it.
It's almost like going back to the basics, right? Like, I know where my data is, I know what my metadata is, I've centralized it. Like now, before you could just run an analytics query, now you could do something way more powerful or way more damaging, right, with an LLM. So get your basics right.
And previously, everything was inside, right? And so this is why I think the DBRX model or some of the custom models, open source models that you can run inside your environment is different. But if you're using APIs externally, you need to think about what those policies are, what it looks like and all. So if you're in a cloud environment, you have a VPC boundary created. I think that's a great way of not leaving the environment and you have it there. But having that kind of a thought and thinking process is not matured enough yet. And I see that is one of the big barriers. So I've seen organizations that have shut down all access to any external LLMs in the organization, which is basically hindrance to innovation in the organization. So we just have to make sure that those things get solved.
So who in the room is married? Well, so I got married 25 years ago. And at the time, I remember it was, my in-laws told me, there's something old, something new. Have you heard of that? You get married, you get something old, something new. It feels like the story of Gen AI is this, right? Is that there's something new, which is the excitement of the business, and your team wants to jump. There's still something old, which is if you don't have the structure and the approach, you ran into that issue that you talked about, which is you have to shut it down before you can figure it out.
Exactly.
We were just talking to a retailer. They got so excited, they put a chatbot out to their customer-facing site, and all they ran into were issues because the language that the people interfacing on the site was different from the inventory information. They were just going back and forth. It was just extremely inaccurate. Now, we didn't prepare for this, but I'm going to go for the ThoughtSpot on that is that, because you are one of the early companies to kind of see this trend. Have you seen steps that the companies take, both from a tech standpoint and an organizational standpoint, to nail that? Because to Sudhir's point, if you don't do it, you're just going to go extreme and shut it down and prevent your organization from modernizing.
Yeah, so I think a few things. So one of the things that we do is, by design, we don't take the output from the LLM and just put it in front of the customer. It actually, LLM generates code that runs, and the output of that code is produced. And so the chances of hallucination is much smaller because the answer is grounded in customers' data. And it's being computed over it. There's still the chance that it could misinterpret your question. And so the other thing that we do, which works very well, is that you have a two-way dialogue going on with the end user. So what we designed a language that looks and feels like natural language, but it's a precise deterministic language. So when you ask me a question about what are my top performing products, the system will echo back top 10 products ranked by revenue. So it has made some decisions for you that you can understand and interpret. And if it doesn't work for you, you can change it. But you can have the confidence that if you understand that statement, everything else is going to be deterministic from there. So that approach we're seeing is working very well. And
from a stack standpoint, so if I'm a customer and I want that today,
yeah.
Does it require a particular knowledge base, or how do I get to that? How quickly can I get to that, I feel?
So it really requires the things that you needed to make a BI solution work before, which is defining your semantic layer well, so that a lot of complexity into how the metric is defined, what joins need to happen, things like that are already encoded and the user doesn't have to think about it. An expert who's governing the system is deciding that. The other thing that happens is that the system's designed to quickly learn from interactions. So the first time you tell me that my top performing products are not ranked by revenue, they're ranked by margin, the definition flips for you, and the system keeps getting smarter and smarter. So there is an element of it that's set up, but it's very painless in the sense that how Wikipedia became Wikipedia. Your knowledge accumulates.
I just want to add a point, right? Like I totally agree that you need a good semantic model, good ontology, but then you also need good quality data, right? It's not like just go get a bunch of data, like go understand, like the data, invest in getting some good data sets for your ontology and your questions. That's going to go a very long way.
Now, earlier today, I'm going completely off script, by the way.
Sure.
Just going through the flow here. And by the way, I'm going to come to you to see if you have any questions about the specific barriers. So start thinking about that after this question. Earlier, you had a beef about the definition of catalog.
Yeah.
Which gets into this, right? When people hear it semantics, well, that's a concept.
You're opening up the web.
Yeah, I'm just rushing you up here. Just so, how should people think about this, particularly with everything that got announced last weekend?
I feel like there's sort of two catalogs, right? There's the technical meta store, sort of what you're seeing with Iceberg and Polaris and all the other like Glue. That's kind of where your definition of where your data files are sitting. And then there's the more business catalog, which is the semantic layer, right? Which is how you define your KPIs. No one's going to know your definitions, your things that your company runs on, and what it means in a data set, right? That is a business glossary and a business catalog, and you really need to get that right. And then you need to get data sets. And because if you're asking some questions with an LLM, you kind of need to know like what are some right answers. And then you kind of need, because how you define and how you prospect your customers or how you define ARR in your company is very different from what you see on the internet, right? You're not going to find that on the internet. You have to teach the LLM, you have to create the data sets, and it starts with defining in a business glossary.
Yeah. Any opinions on that? We agree?
So I think this goes way beyond the general data problems. What I've seen is that pretty much anytime you want to use AI in an enterprise setup, there's three bodies of knowledge that you need. So one is the systems that's behind your database, behind APIs, to be able to call that. The second one is the common sense knowledge that's available on public internet that's internalized in LLMs. And the third one is really the tribal knowledge of the company. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be the critical piece to make AI work inside enterprise. And anybody who's focusing on figuring out a way to capture that tribal knowledge will have good success. And if you ignore that, you will have terrible outcomes.
How do people build these knowledge graphs? What are some of the companies that you work with that nailed what you just talked about last?
No, I think the main question is what's the best representation of the information, the context behind it, and converting it into something that's ready to go ahead and answer complex questions, right? So that's the whole thing. Knowledge graphs play a good role where you can pull together all the different kinds of information within your organization, structured, unstructured, put it into in a system that allows you to go ahead and answer questions, but also get what context was that for that particular question and answer and stuff like that. So I think that's what we see. I think like some of the largest pharmaceutical companies, like if you look at AstraZeneca, if you look at Pfizer, these guys have the knowledge of all different drugs that were discovered over time. They've taken all of that knowledge from unstructured documents they had to drug discovery, like every drug that was tested on different kinds of strains that were there, and converted that into large knowledge graphs where now any researcher, which is thousands of them within the organization, can actually go ahead and ask a question about strain and what is the potential other things that can actually be solved, what drugs can solve it or what enzymes can solve it. So that bringing that kind of environment together is pretty massive. I think Pfizer, I've heard like 200 million documents that they've collected over the years. They've transformed that into knowledge graphs. And so it's just a combination of unstructured knowledge, structured, bringing it together, and how do you represent that into a real knowledge is what it is.
So progressively we're making our way to basically the Gen AI issue is a data issue.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The biggest change that happened in the last 1.5 years is what Gen AI technology was able to do is democratize access to these complex models by making everything just an API. So first things first, right? Like the whole idea is anybody should be able to use these technologies for building an application.
Yeah.
It does come with a lot of power, comes with a lot of responsibility. Which means the second thing is just understanding what data is being used to make that decision, whether you use LLM to go ahead and get the English summarization or something, whether you use building a RAG-based application where you go to a specific database or knowledge base to go extract information and answer. Doesn't matter, but it's finally a developer that decides that. So that's there. The only additional thing I know of, like where a developer needs to go understand is more of like what kind of prompts, what kind of agent technologies are coming up, and how do you blend all of these different systems together into one integrated framework, and what input when you give to the model, what is the response going to come. So I think that is the new skill set developers have to go think about. But other functions within the organizations, I don't think they change fundamentally. You still need data engineers, you still need analysts, you still need data scientists, and you still need developers to build applications that are there. So I think
you don't think there's a new role to be invented?
I've heard Gen Eng as one of the generative AI engineer. It's just a fancy name for a developer who is building a Gen AI app, which I think every engineer is going to be a Gen Eng in next year's time. So
you're just relabeling, kind of what we did with data scientists.
Actually, I think there are a few things there. So I've been doing AI for the last 20 years. And like you said, it's been such a democratizing and humbling experience with Gen AI that 20 years of learning how to do stochastic gradient descent and know about error functions is all useless.
That's a really
I don't think it's useless. Just sorry to jump in, but I think the companies that will build these large-scale models will hire a bunch of those people, and they really need it.
Yeah.
But I'm saying in general, I was just democratization of that access to that technology has become much easier. But sorry.
But one thing that I used to see, the difference between systems teams of engineering and the ML teams was that systems team would have their OKR set and they would have a product vision set and they'll go build it, and they know that 3 months from now the project will be done and it'll behave the way it will behave, but more or less they know before they start. Whereas the ML teams had no idea which of their ideas is going to work. They're going to try 10 ideas, and one, maybe if you're lucky, 2 of those ideas are going to work. So you have to be mentally a lot more adaptable and flexible in terms of experimenting and trying things out and doing different things. And that's a slightly different attitude and different mindset. Not everybody in the systems team, when they transitioned to ML team, succeeded, and vice versa. So I do think that if you want to do well in this space, selecting for that attitude of more experimentation helps.
Let me just add a quick point as well. I think there's another dimension to look at is if you're a data leader, you really want everybody in your team to do Gen AI. It's your job to empower them. And if you're a CEO, you want everybody in your company to learn Gen AI. A salesperson with Gen AI is going to prospect better. Engineer who understands and can use Gen AI is going to be a better developer. I think this, you really need to go focus on that. So I think that side, our companies are don't use Gen AI, right? So I think kind of figuring out the guardrails, the governance, and the policies so you can, this is a massive catalyst. So you want to get your entire company behind it.
You want to embrace it, and you also don't want to create a job of just one person.
Exactly.
A few months ago, Wall Street Journal did this piece on become a prompt engineer. And they created this profession that was the one person.
Right.
And what I think it sounds like is, don't go do that.
Yeah, everybody needs to be a prompt engineer.
Everybody becomes one. Any questions on that before I switch to my last question here? This is your panel as well, so don't hesitate, don't be shy. We had one person ask a question. I'm just going to move on then, because this one I'm going to push you on a little bit more. And I see we have about 11 minutes to go, so I'm not sure that we'll get everything. But I think about a lot of the customers that you talk to. You're seeing a lot of great successes, and you're also seeing a lot of failures. There's got to be patterns. What's the one thing that everybody does that you're thinking, don't do that? You should, everybody here that's in this room, that's going to be something that's going to be very tempting, and you should not go off and do it. We started talking a little bit about with the prompt engineer.
I think there's two different things to talk about here. Are you building or are you buying? And different things to worry about. So if you're building, I think the biggest problem I see is that there's a lot of resume building instead of product building. So it's very cool to go do fine tuning. It looks great on resume. Exceedingly rare cases where it's actually helpful or useful or worthwhile investment. So like always start with much simpler prompt engineering and get as far as you can with prompt engineering. In fact, what happens is that like you need instruction tuned models to do any kind of reasoning. And it's very tricky to fine tune those kinds of models and still keep the instruction tuning capability there. So like smaller models, fine tuning still works. Larger model, you can actually go the other direction. If you're buying, the biggest problem is that there's so much noise, and this technology allows you to create pretty demos so easily that all your experimentation bandwidth will go away in chasing slick-looking demos, and then at the end of it, you'll be exhausted, and it's like, this thing doesn't work, I don't want to do anything with it. So the way to avoid it is to ask, where is a successful implementation of this product? Who is benefiting from it? And then talk to them. Like, this is my personal pet peeve, because I know like the thing that we do has been working for a long time, and there are a lot of people claiming that it works. Like one large customer that shall remain unnamed, they looked at our product, they were like, yes, this is what we wanted. Next day they came and said, we are getting a Copilot from Microsoft, we're going to do that first. 6 months later they came back, doesn't work. And now they're using our product, but like for that customer and for a company like us, that 6 months really hurts. So be thoughtful in where you spend your experimentation bandwidth.
The one thing I would say is like what patterns I have seen, one of the biggest failure modes is people don't understand what the end-to-end use case looks like. So they jump to trying pieces of the puzzle. This was one of the retailers, like we have a good common friend there. So I was talking to them and their thing was, hey, we're experimenting with our vector database. We figured out what we are going to do. This is all the stuff, like I think it's working well and all that. It was purely basically take all the descriptions of items, convert it into vectors and do a vector search for something like that, right? So that's the simple scenario. So my thing was, okay, great, you can absolutely do that. Won't you want to filter it down to what category the person is in, what the other attributes that are more relevant to it in that scenario? They're like, yeah, of course we have to do that, otherwise the cost structure goes off. If your catalog is pretty massive, imagine that. The other company that we're working with, like, buy now, pay later. So they literally scan the whole web's data and stuff like that. And so for them, okay, I can use vectorization to go vectorize everything and search, and the search would be like billions of entities for no reason, versus you may want to first filter down to what category, what product area you are in, and then do it. But when they start, they don't think about the whole end-to-end use case. Their thing is, oh, I know this is the coolest new technology, experimentation, let me build something, let me figure it out. But by the time you try going to production, these things don't come together. So the question is, at least look at the end-to-end business use case, figure out where the value would be. Learning is different. You want to learn, go learn, that's fine. But if you want to productionize it, just that end-to-end value chain that you have with the business use case is important. Figure out your end-to-end architecture, and then becomes much easier.
That's one feeling. A lot of that where people are going to say, go get your quick wins, get the small deployments. But if you do it without the context of the end-to-end, then I think what I've learned over the last 25 years being in this space, this is an ecosystem play. And it's becoming more about the ecosystem than just the functionality, particularly with multi-cloud. And we know it here with multiple data types and formats. And that if you don't orchestrate for that, you're going to end up having to pay a lot of tax because you're going to go back and redo things.
And it will be hugely costly, right? It's like cost is real in this world, right? Especially in the Gen AI space. So knowing where your cost structures will split and go, I think is super important.
All right, so mistakes. And now I'm going to get to the positive, okay? I'm coming back to the one thing you should do. But what's your take on the mistake that you see as a common?
I think these guys hit it right. Like, have clear thesis on what your return on investment is. So that's going to prevent your demowares. Like, think through like how's it going to get to production, and that's going to be like that's going to shrink the number of projects that you can probably look at to a much smaller number, and then like get the data for it and like have a clear plan that you could actually launch that thing. You might need a human in the loop, you might need somebody to go look at the outputs, but like really be thoughtful on like what you want to go look at. I think we're done with the experimentation phase just for experimentation, like you said.
I'm surprised none of you has said budget, because one of the issues that I see is people just can't figure out their budget, and they do one or two things. Either they take budget from something else and they put it into Gen AI, and I'd love to know how you feel about that. Or they invent a number, they try to get approval for it, and then 12 months later.
Bruno, the budget is only for Gen AI.
Exactly.
I don't think there is
I was
any
about to
budget
say
left
that.
for anything else.
There's no budget issue for Gen AI.
Unless you tag it as Gen AI, it's not getting funded.
Yeah, it's a thing now.
Yeah, jokes apart, but that is real, right? The
It's
pressure
like-
on.
This is why like every company is like, launches a feature and calls it Gen AI. So you can go get budget for it.
But
Good or bad, I think a lot of times the hype of technology, the pressure from the board and leadership to go use the technology is massive. Now, it's not wrong or right. We had the largest retailer, 2 million plus users. Their employees needed to have skills-based solution, and then that ran, everything was good, POC, but does it have Gen AI angle to it? Okay, put a conversational interface on it. The value was not the conversational, it did add some incremental value. The 95% of the value is with the underlying system. So I think by just tagging it, the budget comes, but the real thing is the value is not on the chat experience, right? It's what your real problem you're solving. So I think
you don't have a magic way of approaching the budget just yet, but you know that
just tag it
has
as
to be in
Gen
the
AI.
picture. Exactly, just label it. All right, let's end on a positive note. The thing that you see customers are absolutely nailing, that's a best practice. What do we like that we see in the market today?
I'll say maybe this, right? Like you are seeing, like I'll sort of say this. My nephew called me the other day, like asking me for input on Gen AI. I was like, be curious, learn, build a model. It's a lot easier than stochastic gradient and really trying to go figure out, it's like building an app, fine tuning can be now done in a couple of hours. So like be curious would be what I would say. Like that's a thing I would sort of amplify that message.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll come back to the thing that I said was that the thing that works really well is if you deploy something where you have the opportunity to introduce the tribal knowledge that's there in your company, then you actually, what you're doing is you're taking the knowledge from the experts in your organization and making it available to the most junior person. And that is money any day. So if you can build product, if you can find products which allows you to take the tribal knowledge in your company and systematize it in a way that lots of people can benefit from that, you'll have very positive outcomes.
So getting everybody involved, not just the most junior, but also the most senior people in the organization.
I think this is one place where I will say you don't have to lead, you can follow, see what other people have done which is successful. Any customer personalized experiences where a language technology can help, it's a great one, right? Like, you know, whether it's customer service experience, whether it's an ad, personalized ad that you're doing, your internal information, using the LLM to give a much better write-up on that works. It's proven by many companies, much easier to go after doing that use case. It's easy. Second one, you know that anything that's internal for the employees, it has limited blast radius that you can go ahead and use it. Take your internal documents, structured data, give more access to more people. Even if it is wrong, I think the impact of error is not high, at least you can learn. So that's the second thing which we know works, right? The end one, which is like trying to solve the most complex kind of a problem using a new technology that impacts the end customer experience and all of that, that's more complex. So I think we need to wait for the technology to mature and figure out. You can use RAG and graph RAG and other things to give you much better experience that you can, but you need much better testing, you need much better validation. But like understand what use cases are easy. Do the easy stuff first, right?
Yeah.
Like, and then do the complex stuff. People sometimes try to jump to the hard problems You don't have to solve and you don't have to lead, just follow what people are doing.
That's interesting guidance, right? Because most of the time you want to be on the bleeding edge, but you might not be on the right side of that blade if you.
You can let Google do it, like they're trying to put it on the main experience, OpenAI. Let them learn, let them get more accurate, then we all can follow them.
Let them subsidize our innovation.
What do you say?
Let them subsidize our innovation.
Yeah. Well, you're starting to see enough examples, right, that gravitate towards what you're talking about, which is internal use case, and that's what we see customers doing first. Because of what Sudhir talked about, it's a lot more controlled. If you make an error, it doesn't have a huge bottom line impact, but you can get a lot of learning from internal first, then customers, and then there is within apps. Mm-hmm. And if you do it in that order, you are going to learn that the use cases is developer productivity, sales and marketing, customer support. It just kind of gravitate. Every customer is going to have 168 use case, but really, I think research shows that 75% of the value is going to come from 4. And those are the ones that we named.
Exactly.
All right, we could talk forever, but we're at 0, which means there's no negative. So we could have been talking over 20 minutes over time. I wouldn't even know, but I want to thank you all for the great panel.